Hi everyone, welcome back to GameMaker Cast. It's Mickey again, and in this tutorial we're going to be working on a simple platformer. Now I know there's already a bunch of different platformer tutorials out there, but I plan on extending this one out, and we really need our own base code in order to work with the next couple of tutorials. So I want to make sure that we have our base platform down solid before we move on. Now I'm starting with a simple project here. I have a few extra components in here and I'll use them as we go, but right now just consider this an empty project. One of the first things that I like to do in our options and main is set my games per second or frames per second to 60, just so that our game will run a lot smoother. Now I'm going to create a new room here, and I'm just going to call this room game. And you will already have room 0, but I'm going to put our room game above my original room. Now the only reason I'm doing this is because our room 0 actually has something in it that is going to help me explain a few things, so we can kind of ignore that for now. I'm going to create a couple sprites. I'm going to use, let's say 32 by 32, and I will call our first sprite the sprite of the player. And we'll just edit the image, and just like most things, we'll just use some basic graphics for now. So the player will have a green box, and we'll create a new sprite, SPR. Let's just call this block. And we will edit this image. Actually, sorry, let's make sure we resize it appropriately, 32 by 32. We'll edit the image, and let's choose, let's try purple. Not sure how that will really look, but that's fine. And then we want to make sure that both of the sprites, their anchor is in the middle center. And I'll just change it for the player. And now our sprites are good to go. The next thing I want to do is create a couple objects for these sprites. So I'm going to have an object for the player, and then just an object for the block. So we'll create our first object, which will be object block, because this one's pretty simple. All we need to do is assign the correct sprite, and that's it. So let's close it. Now let's create another object. We'll just call this object player, and we're going to start off by assigning the sprite to the sprite player. Now we're going to have a couple events. We'll add an event for create. We also need a step event, and that should be good for now. In the create event, what we'll do is we want to define a couple keys here. So we'll say key left is going to be ORD of our A key. Our key right will be ORD and then the D key. Now you could also use the arrow keys, and to use the arrow keys, what you would say is instead of ORD, we would say VK underscore right. And that would be the right arrow. There's left, up, and down as well. Now the reason I'm using ORD is because I want to get the key number that refers to the letters A and D on my keyboard. So I'm going to be using WASD to control the player. So I'll finish this off by key up as W and key down as, as S. The next thing I want to do is, I'm not going to be adding gravity yet, but I want to add acceleration and deceleration. So I'll have two variables. I'll call accel, and I'll set this to 0.5, and we'll say decel equals 0.2. Actually, let's make this 0.6. Now, it's key that we try to keep these as round numbers, just because when we're dealing with acceleration and deceleration, we may run into a problem if this is, say, at 3 and our max speed is 4. And then we're going to end up with a number that can't be minus 3 or plus 3. So what I mean is, if our speed is 4 and we're taking away 3 each time, obviously this is going to be 1, but when it takes away 3 again, well, that's going to be minus 2. So then our player is going to be moving left and right constantly, and we don't want that. So we try to stick with either whole numbers, so our acceleration could be easily 4 and our deceleration could be 2, or with the fractions we just stick with the round numbers as well, not the odd numbers. Anyway, actually, so we'll keep it like this for now. The next thing we need to do is create a couple variables that will hold how fast our player can move. So we'll say our vertical speed is going to be equal to 0, and our horizontal speed is also, I can't spell that, horizontal, hang on, horizontal speed will be equal to 0. So this will be up and down movements and left and right. Now we also need to figure out how fast our player can actually move. So we could say max speed, and let's set that to 12. I think let's change this a little bit. We'll keep it as 4 and 2 for now. We'll see how that works. Alright, so we have our max speed, our acceleration, deceleration, our horizontal and vertical speeds. Now, within our step event, we need to first figure out what keys we are pressing. So we can do this by saying VAR, and we want a horizontal input. And the reason we're using VAR in front here is because we only want this variable here, horizontal input, to exist within this step event. So that means that no other events within this object can access this horizontal input. It's just not really needed. With this horizontal input, we want to say it's going to equal our keyboard check, and whether or not we are pressing down our key left minus whether or not we are pressing down our key right. So this is going to return either -1 to move to the left, or it will turn 0 because we're not pressing any keys, or it will return 1, meaning moving to the right. So we can also do the same thing with the vertical input, and this will be the keyboard check. And what we want to do is we want to check our key down minus keyboard check key up. So once again, this vertical input will return -1, 0, or 1, depending on the keys that we're pressing. Next thing we want to do is work on the horizontal movement. So let's create a region, and we'll just call this horizontal movement. We'll end that region. And if you haven't used regions before, all this allows us to do is kind of encapsulate this little area of code. So whatever we write in there, we have this little code folding icon that we can fold up our code. Just kind of makes it a little bit neater. Alright, so in here we want to see if we are pressing anything. So we'll say if horizontal movement does not equal 0, meaning that we are pressing some key, left, right, or both of them. So if we have some horizontal input, then what we could say is horizontal speed plus equals, or horizontal input times the acceleration speed, so accel. So what this is going to do is this will be -1 or 1 times whatever our acceleration is, which is 4. So each time that we are pressing a key, it will be multiplied by 4. And then we have to make sure that our horizontal speed does not go beyond our max speed here. So we'll have to clamp it, meaning that if our horizontal speed is, say, 20, it's going to actually be set to the max speed. So we'll clamp the horizontal speed, and we want to make sure that we can go left and right. So the minimum speed that we can go will actually be minus max speed, and then the maximum speed for the end. So this would be, in our case, what do we have? 12. So this would be -12 and 12. Okay, so now that we've done that, we also need an else statement here, but we'll get into that in just a second. Finally, once we have some horizontal movement, we'll just say x plus equals horizontal speed. Now the only thing that we're not doing is resetting the horizontal speed. So for now, we'll just say horizontal speed equals 0, just so we can show this off. In the room, let's go there, and underneath instances, let's add the object player in here, and let's hit run just so we can see if this is actually going to work or not. Once it loads up, you can see it's working, but I have my keys messed up, so let me fix that. In the workspace here at the top, I need this to be actually key right, and key left. All right, so that will fix it by moving left and right. Now, the next thing I want to do is introduce some deceleration. So in our else statement here, we know that we are either pressing both keys, so horizontal input is 0, or we are pressing no keys. What we have to do is check to see how much we're actually moving in order to determine if we're going to decelerate positively or negatively. So let me explain here. We could say if, I'll just copy this, if our horizontal speed is bigger than our deceleration, then what we want to do is say horizontal speed minus equals decel, so deceleration. So if our horizontal speed is bigger than 2, then we're going to take 2 away from it. So if our horizontal speed is 1, then we don't want to do anything. Right here we'll say else if our horizontal speed is less than minus our deceleration. So in this case, if a horizontal speed is less than minus 2, what we want to do is add our deceleration value into it. Otherwise, we'll just reset our horizontal speed to 0. Okay, so let's run the game and let's make sure everything's working. So if I press right, I'll go to the right, and left, I'll go to the left. And you can see, you may not be able to see on your screen, but I can definitely see it on mine, but the deceleration is working. And if I actually set that to something a lot lower, let's say 0.5, and I hit run, once I let go of the key, it will definitely decelerate a lot slower, but you can see that it's working. So within our room, the next thing I want to do is place a couple of blocks. So in here, I'll just make a room like this, and I'll drag this out so it goes down there. So we're just going to make a basic square. Nothing very fancy here. Oops. Just so we can get something working. And I'll drag that up. So what we want to do now is we don't want our player to continue moving outside of the square. So once they hit here, we want them to stop. So within our code, in the step event, before we move the player, we need to check to see if the player is actually hitting our object block. So we can do this with place meeting. So we could say if place meeting at our X position plus whatever speed we are about to move to and our current Y position, if we hit the object block, then what we want to do is come inside this if statement here. So once again, we are checking, put this back here, we are checking to see if where we are about to move is going to hit the object block. And if we are, then we're going to come in here. Now we are in here, so we can run a simple while loop. We can say while we are not going to hit X, Y, object block, and we'll come back and fix this in a second. So what we need to say is while whatever direction we are moving, either left or right, we are not going to hit that block, then we want to do something in here. Now this is where this other room is going to come in, because what we need to do is move our object left or right by 1 pixel each time. So what we can do is we could use a method called sign, and we could run it on horizontal speed. Now if we check out, plus horizontal speed, and if we check out the help, once it loads up, you can see it returns a 1, -1, or 0. Now, to give a very good example of this, I'm going to drag my room 0 up here, and I'll just hit run. We're basically running the same code as we have written here. The only difference is I'm displaying the sign of horizontal speed and vertical speed here. Now, if I press the right key, I'm going to move quite fast, but the sign of the horizontal movement is only 1. If I move to the left, it's a -1. So you can see how this function actually helps us quite a lot. We don't have to check to see which way we're moving. We could just say add the sign of whatever speed to our X position, and this will give us either +1 or -1. Once we have done that, Well, all we have to do is we have to move our object towards the block. So we could say x plus equal the sine of horizontal speed. And just like before, this will give us +1 or -1. And then once we have hit the block, we want to make sure that our horizontal speed is equal to 0 because we don't want to move the player anymore. Okay, I'm just going to indent this a little bit just to make it a little bit cleaner. And I am going to now move the game above my room and run it once more. Now, when we run our game, if I hold down the right key, you can see I come directly here. Looks like we have a error. Let's fix this first. What is our error here? Object player block not set before reading. Okay. So let's go here and object block. And it's right here. I've messed that up. So let's fix that and run it one more time. Make sure that our collision is working. So let's press left this time. And you can see I go directly I go right at the border of this, and the right side I'm right at the border of that. And even if I let go of the key, I'll decelerate in, so that's working perfectly fine. Alright, so the last thing we want to do is get a little bit of gravity working. And then our platform is pretty much complete here. I'm going to add one key here. I'll say key jump, and that is going to be VK space. So we'll use the space bar. And we need a variable for our gravity. So we'll just set our gravity to 1. And then we also need the jump, let's say jump force. And let's set that to -12. Now we're just going to double check on -12 because I always forget. I want to make sure that, yeah. So you can see right here, this is our Y position. I want it to go up, so -12 would take our player up. All right, now back in our step, we can get rid of the horizontal movement, and we want to work on our vertical movement. So we can create a new region called vertical movement, and just make sure we end that region tag off. Now this is going to be pretty close to the same as we had before. Now the only thing we want to do is make sure that we always apply gravity. So we could say vertical speed plus equals grav. And actually this should be -1. So we always want, oh no, sorry, that is right. It's going to be 1 because we want to move down. So our vertical speed is always going to have gravity applied. Once we have gravity applied, we need to make sure that we are checking our collision. Well, our collision check is actually already written. It's this code here. So we can actually take this and copy it, come down here, and paste it in. The only thing that we really need to change is we're not checking horizontal speed anymore. We're checking vertical speed. So let's take out the X position here, and we'll say Y plus vertical speed. And same with this. We are checking Y plus the sine of vertical speed. And finally, our Y position plus the sine of vertical speed. Once we have collided with the object block, we set our vertical speed to 0. Now we can say Y plus equal vertical speed. So if we run this, we should have gravity applied, so our player will come down, and we hit that block. Now the only thing that we need to do now is we need to assign, or we need to give the player the ability to jump, and I would call this code base complete. So within here, we need to decide when our player is on the ground. Well, we can easily see that right here, we are setting the vertical speed to 0, and that's because we know that our player is currently on the ground of object block. So this would be a good spot to assign the jump information. So in here, we could say if keyboard, and we want keyboard check, let's say pressed, we'll say key underscore jump. So if we've pressed the jump key, then our vertical speed is going to be equal to our jump force. Now, if we've coded everything correctly, our vertical speed gets set to 0, and then when we jump, our vertical speed is all of a sudden -12, which will send our player up into the air because of this part here. The next frame, gravity will take over and bring our player back down. We don't have to worry about double jumping or jumping in the air right now. So let's go ahead and hit F5 and let's see if we've done this correctly. So if I hit space, you can see my player jumps. I can move around, and let's actually increase that jump variable. So let's say let's do -16, and within the room, let's create a block that we can jump on, just so we can make sure that everything's working. We'll hit F5 to run our game one more time. Now, if I come under this block, if I hit space, I can't jump into it, but I should. The controls are a little off. If I hit jump, I can jump on top. I really need to get rid of that deceleration being so slippery. But other than that, I would say this platform code base is complete and ready for a couple of more lessons. At this point, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you comment, like, or subscribe. Thanks again.